Hello everyone, welcome to another Games Workshop Blast from the Past, this time the Codex Catachans. This was published in the year 2000, back when I was 16 years old, and whilst it's called a codex, it's actually more of a supplement. Now, as I understand it, this is the third edition codex supplement, and in third edition there are actually two codexes. I've done a video for this one here, and this is actually the second codex for the third edition. And what it's referring to here is the first codex of the third edition. So confusing, but whatever. And if you're someone who played in the previous editions, please let me know how this all worked, because I collected at this point, but I didn't actually play the game. And at the age of 16, I didn't know what was going on besides painting my miniatures with different colours. So as you can see, as I said, quite a small document. And back in the glorious years of the year 2000, this was a majority black and white, with some pictures being colour to illustrate the beautiful miniatures, which we can look at. So, as we go through this, it's obviously quite a small document, but the key thing I want to call out is all the cool pictures. I mean, this is the glory days of the multiple regiments, and as per my other vintage codex reviews I've looked at in this link here, there are numerous other regiments which get a lot more support than they do now. Obviously, they're starting to fade away, getting less and less rules and no miniatures, except for, of course, Death Corps of Creek, Catachan, and Acadian. So as we look here, you can already tell some of the ancient miniatures, and I think as I eyeball these, the vast majority of these probably are metal miniatures. And again, if you're an old war dog from the year 2000 and collected these and know a bit about it, please let me know. But I think the vast majority of these miniatures here are metal, which is amazing. I love this mortar tube. Look how ridiculously big that mortar round is, more like an artillery round, but again, scale was a bit different back in these days. Now, there's some cool stuff in here. It talks about like why you should collect an army, what's in here, so an army list, collecting and modelling the Catachan army, which is really cool to see. The Catachans, which talks about their rules. And I think there was some cool stuff which calls out here, but yeah, an overview of Catachan. So Catachan is a death world, a planet so inimical to life that every day there is a battle for survival. The hardy people of Catachan are descendants of the very first settlers who colonised the planet generations ago. By necessity, they are a tough breed, well versed in survival amidst planet-wide jungles that swarm with vicarious predators, flesh-eating plants, poisonous insects and virulent diseases. And one more line just to say is, the people of Catachan have but one resource to value to the Imperium, their superb regiments of jungle fighters. So really cool to see the in-depth sort of discussion about how tough it is to live in the death world of Catachan and the tough troops that come out of it. So as we flick over, now this is really cool, and it gives you just again how much depth there was for the Catachans, that they had a very specific set of rules which were quite detailed. So firstly, if you field them in an Imperial Guard army, the Catachans cost an additional, and they become Death World veterans, so they get +1 weapon skill, plus also some additional rules here, where if something about when they move through the jungles and woods, have a better movement. They've always got a 4+ save if they're in woods and jungle, like a cover save today. And if Death War veterans don't move in the movement phase, they may see and shoot through 12 inches of woods or jungle rather than 6 inches, as would usually be the case. And there's a bit more explanation in the back of the book about fighting in the jungle. Death War veterans can also infiltrate, and this is going to be no different to what you can do in the current editions of 40k. But you can really see that there's a lot of benefit for actually playing Catachan. So you get +1 weapon skill, 3 points a model, additional rules here, and then also says a Catachan command platoon may include 0 to 2 assault teams as part of the platoon's complement of heavy weapon squads. You can have Death World Sentinel squadrons, which have got a specific data sheet. And the army may include Catachan Devil squads and or Death World veteran snipers as elite choices. So there's some specific units for Catachans, and as you can see, it's obviously a small book, but as we go through it, you can see there's a lot of depth, giving you a lot of options to play Catachan as a proper army. It talks about jungle terrain. There's a bit more detail on that at the back of the book, and then specific war gear to them, which is demolition charge, which is really cool. As per the other codex I looked at from this era, being the second book of the third edition, they do a lot of combining law statements into rule statements. So as we read through it, it's a bit of a combination of both, and it's a very different way of sort of interpreting the rules. But it obviously worked. And again, if you played in this series, give me your opinion, because I was 16, didn't play at all at this point besides painting miniatures. So first data page or data sheet is the Death World Veteran Command Headquarters. You've got a Colonel, Captain, and a Death World Veteran. Now, back in these days, weapon score, ballistic skill, the higher the score, the better. So I believe a 5 basically means you hit on 2s, and a 4 was 3s, and that's how I interpret it. You can then see initiative is a unique value back in this edition where it impacted charging units. And actually, you could charge into someone and they have a high leadership or initiative, and they fought before you. Different ways of doing things. And then Deflano in this edition, every infantry model moves 6 inches, and therefore it's not stated, it was just assumed. Now I think with this, there's not much to call as far as the weaponry is concerned. There's some cool stuff, you can take all the extra war gear, but then you can see, so special rules, they're Death World veterans, therefore they get all the rules over here. And then they've got a leadership buff, so any unit within 12 inches of the model in the command headquarters may use the officer's leadership 9 for the colonel. Right, and then this is super cool. So if you attach a commissar to this, to any of these Death World veterans, you basically have to roll a test. And I think before the game begins, on a D6, on a 1, the commissar has met an unfortunate accident and cannot be used. So basically it says here, Death World veterans resent strangers telling them what to do or threatening their friends, so commissars have a difficult time maintaining control. They suffer a disproportionately high number of accidents when serving with Death World troops. That's amazing. So you could take a commissar and have a 13% chance, whatever the stats are, of actually not playing the model at all, which is really cool. Not meta, if meta was a thing back in this edition, but very, very cool. Very, very cool. Okay, as we turn over now, okay, elites. Interestingly, it goes elites and troops as opposed to troops and elites, but whatever. Okay, so Catachan Devil squads. Now, as we eyeball the difference between the Catachan Devils and the troops, I think the difference comes, these are better shooters. Ballistic skill of 4 versus a ballistic skill of 3. Oh no, that's the platoon. I'll go to the right one in a second, but I was basically trying to spot the difference. And the difference, I think, is they've got some additional cool rules. So they're always Death World veterans. They can ambush, and they're hardened veterans. Now, these are unique universal rules. So back in this edition, hardened fighters and steadfast battle honors was a universal rule where you therefore went to the page 163 of the rule book and check what it meant. Interesting to see that back in this edition, in the year 2000, they had universal rules which apply to multiple different armies. And in 10th edition, blast from the past, 23 years later, they're bringing it back. Okay, the veteran assault team. Here they can take things like shotguns, melters, and plasma guns. And these are fieldable in squads of between a sergeant and 3 or a sergeant and 6 Death World veterans, so between 4 and 7. Bit of a strange number versus the Catachan Devils. You can take them between squads of 5 and 10. Okay, and you can see here, their special rule is gung-ho. Death World veterans fear nothing. They may reroll failed morale and pinning tests and try to regroup even if below half strength. So pinning test, I believe, again, if you've played it, you're more effective than I am, but pinning test had to do with, it took a lot of firepower to basically roll a leadership test. And I understand in this edition, you constantly fell back, and some models would just flee off the board if they failed the leadership test over and over again. And being below half strength was really significant in this edition. And as per 10th edition, it's going to be significant as well, because you've got to roll the battle shock test, which is going to be quite important in the new edition of 40k. Right, so veteran snipers. Now, these rules are really, really unique. Okay, so reroll failed rerolls because they're firing like deadly toxins. Okay, that's very nice. They're Death World veterans. Okay, we said that before. Ambush. So they can be set up in ambush as described in the special rules section at the start of the army list, which we'll look at in a second. They've got a 3+ cover save if in woods or jungle. So basically they go from a 5 to a 3. which is like, a lot of the more recent rules. You get +1 to your save if you're in cover, so you're basically achieving the same thing. But they've got this unique rule here called disappear. So you may never move a Death World veteran sniper model. During your movement phase, you remove the model, representing the sniper merging back into the shadows so you can fight another day. Once removed, a sniper may not be returned to the battlefield, but doesn't count as having been killed for victory point purposes. Death World veteran snipers can't claim table quarters or other objectives and don't have to be killed for an attacker to win Meat Grinder. Okay, so you could deploy them, do a couple of shots, and then pull them out and deny your opponent the actual chance to kill the model. In fact, interestingly, you can see the term Meat Grinder, which I assume was a secondary objective, maybe like no prisoners, the body count or the wound count secondary objective in 9th edition. And also table quarters, so just like engage all fronts or other sort of, movement style secondary objectives. So fascinating to see this stuff all popping up. That is a very special rule. I mean, they just disappear. Okay. All right. Now onto troops. Now, I thought I made a bit of a mistake before, but you can see obviously explains the platoon, and then it sort of shows off the leadership element, and then it goes into the actual infantry squads here. So, okay. Now, as we eyeball this, weapon skill 4, ballistic skill of 3. If I go back to the Catachan Devils, they're basically superior with ballistic skill. Okay, they're better shooters, and they can take some other cool war gear, and they've got some cooler rules. So you can see here, right, so the platoon commander is an independent character. He may only join units from his platoon. Okay, so again, as per 10th edition, we've got this idea of leader models. It used to be called independent characters, could join onto units. Again, everyone can use his leadership if they're nearby. And then comms links. So this allowed units 12 inches away from him to use his leadership test, which is the same as that. Okay, whatever. Right, let's have a look. So yeah, okay, so you've got infantry squad, you've got heavy weapons squad, and again, these are all Death World veterans. And then you can take Ograms. Okay, so you can attach Ograms to your platoon, your infantry platoons, I believe. Okay, yeah, okay, all right. I'm not making much sense of this, so apologies, but okay, Ograms don't count as Death World veterans for the purposes of the rule, and therefore can't infiltrate, move through jungle as if it was clear terrain. Okay, and that again is no different to the 9th edition Codex here, where Abhumans, our Ratling and Ogren friends and Bolgrams don't benefit from the regimental doctrine. So interesting to see in the year 2000, it was the same principle applied. Right, now on to fast attack. So we got the Sentinel Squadron, and I'm very confident at this point in the evolution of 40k, there were just Sentinels. There were no Scout or Armoured Sentinels. And you can see again, they had the idea of armour-facing values. There was no toughness for vehicles, so you basically had to shoot off this. And I don't know how it worked, but I think it was a lot tougher to kill vehicles in this edition. And that's also the way that 10th edition is shaping up. His vehicles will rule the roost for a lot of the game, unless you bring specialist anti-armor weapons. Right, so the key thing it's got here, okay, so Death World Sentinels are fitted with rough terrain modifications. These allow them to reroll the dice for how far they may move through difficult terrain. Okay, and Chainsword Warriors, they get +1 attack bonus, so you've got 2 attacks when they're in melee with the Chicken Walkers. Okay, so no different to what we've really got today. You can whack on a chainsaw, get additional attacks. Now, Death World Veterans Patrol. Okay, so you've got between 1 and 3, so between 4 and 6 models. And what's their special rule? Okay, so they can ambush. Right, so let's just make sense of this. So these guys can ambush, Death World Veterans Patrol. They can take flamer, melter gun, some special weapons. The infantry squad can't ambush, but Death World veterans, they take all the normal weapons. And then you've got the Catachan Devil squad, which has taken between 5 and 10. Okay, they're hardened. Got it. Okay, so ambush hardened veterans, normal dudes, and these guys can ambush. Okay, got it. Okay, so there's a bit, it's basically the stacking of the special rules, the additional rules. Okay, so they're counted as fast attack because they can ambush. Okay, all right. Now, I think that might actually... Oh, one more. One more. Heavy weapons support. Heavy weapons squads. Right. They can take... Now, I'm trying to make sense of this because I think it's a bit different how they sort of... Okay, so 1 and 3 weapon teams, each made up of 2 Death Ward veterans. Cool. Got it. Okay, so they carry a las gun and they're armed with mortars. Right, and they're Death Ward veterans. Okay, so you can only take mortars for the Death Ward veterans to rain death on the enemy. But then you may take up to 3 booby traps as a single heavy support choice. Each booby trap you take allows you to booby trap at 1 inch square. The booby traps you may take and be set up in the same area or split between different areas. Okay, all right. So you can take booby traps. Now, who carries the booby traps? I don't know. And again, if you're around this period, please tell me because I'd like to know. But okay, so you got plasma, shredder, spring mine, and trap. Wow, this is amazing. All this detail. Okay, so booby traps are set up using the special what's found on page 21. Okay, they ignore cover saves. They're pinning. The unit that suffers 1 or more casualty from a booby trap must test for pinning. Okay, right, plasma charge. The model that triggered the charge is automatically hit. Okay, so plasma charge is automatically hit. Shredder mine, which I'm assuming, well, actually it's got spring mine in a sec, but located D6 away from the target that triggered it, in the direction indicated by the arrow for the scatter dice. Okay, so in this edition, you rolled a scatter dice, had an arrow that points where it goes, just with like the ordnance, the big templates, the big blast templates, so it indicate where they land with a D6 plus a dice pointing where it landed. Okay, and that indicates where it blows up. Now a spring mine, I'm assuming that's like the, I think they're called jumping jacks, the ones that pop out of the ground and blast it sort of waist height to do awful damage to the target. Place the large ordnance blast marker so the central hole is over the model which triggered the booby trap. To roll a scatter dice in the same way you would for ordnance. Any model that are fully under the ordnance blast marker hit automatically, and those that are partially hit are hit by a 4+ on a 4+. So, okay, got it. Okay, right. So automatically hit at strength 7. You've got a bit of a blast, you've got the ordnance blast battery markers, which are a larger footprint, but getting a bit weaker. Okay, and trap. Place a small blast marker, so the central hole over the model. Any models fully under the blast marker hit automatically and are partially on a 4+. Okay, they're different, but that is a strength 3 and AP 6. And I think in this edition, the lower the AP, the better it was. I think. But fascinating. You can bring booby traps, and as we look at it in a second, it's interesting to see how you sort of set it up. Right, so they're the specific Catachan Death Ward veteran units. Again, it's very interesting to see they were very specific data sheets, very specific. Okay, now collecting and modelling a Catachan's army. And again, you can see the glory of the old days, like all these specific sculpts. And I think this was before the plastic ones. I think. So a lot of these are metal miniatures. You can imagine carrying this in your carry case, how physically heavy it would have been. Oh, the glory days. Wow. Okay. Now this is cool. So this is very old school. The fact they give you all this depth about sort of the modeling of the units. So okay, I don't know what the intent of this page is, but it just shows you the cool stuff. So a bit of lore. The assault teams carry deadly weapons, such as heavy flamers, are devastating amongst the short lines of sight and close confines of the jungle environment. Unfortunately, they're fairly few in number and need to be kept out of sight of the enemy until they're close enough to launch lethal attacks. But just describing, giving you a lot of depth into what these guys are meant to do in the battlefield. The snipers, this guy with a demolition charge looking like a total badass, and then like a veteran assault team with a sentinel. Okay. This is amazing. Like, to include this in a codex, can you imagine having this in a codex? Like, okay, if you use a white undercoat versus a black undercoat, it achieves a different look when painting the miniature. Imagine that in the codex today. It wouldn't happen. But this is mega old school. It talks about dwarf flesh and chestnut ink. They're obviously, we've gone on to shades, and I don't think dwarf flesh exists anymore, but just shows you the vintage of this document. Okay, painting and modelling camouflage. Okay, yep, so a bit of ways to whack a bit of paint on the blokes to show like pointless. I mean, these guys have got like, they're barely clothed. What's the point of camouflage? And just be naked for heaven's sake from the top up, doesn't matter. But then again, yeah, showing you how to apply camouflage to these guys. So Aluminium mesh was cut and wrapped in the lasgun. Once painted brown, areas of the mesh were painted with PVA glue and dipped in flock, which is amazing. Okay, door matting was cut and glued into holes drilled into the miniature's bandana. The strands were cut down and flocked. The leaves were washed with green ink. I mean, this is amazing. Again, in a codex, it's just outstanding. Again, this is crazy. I mean, admittedly, like this, they actually show you converting Death Ward veterans, and that looks terrible. But I mean, actually, I know these names: Andy Chambers and Gav Thorpe. Obviously, some blokes who worked in the business many years ago, showing off their handiwork. But you know, showing the heavy flamer conversions. Some officers using parts from his bits box. Gav made a demolition charge by cutting the aerial off a comlink. Okay. Dave Thomas has modelled a squad of Catachan devils using various extra bits, including Necromunda weapons and Mordheim heads. Okay. Jesus. Wow. Right, now making jungle terrain. Yeah, I remember as a kid having fond memories of seeing this type of thing and always just having no idea how they made it. But I remember this. I actually owned one of these trees, or several of these trees as a kid. It's all in the bin now, probably back in Australia. But it does show you, you know, the type of materials you can use. Leshin? I don't know what that is. It's some sort of like product. Small clumps of trees give you more flexibility set up on the battlefield. But again, showing you, you know, what you can use. Actually call it aquarium plants can be used to basically build the jungle terrain. So again, absolutely amazing to see all this. Right, okay, making jungle terrain. I mean, this looks really like a lot of effort. You know, bits of wire, dry strips of bandage, watered down in PVA glue, running plaster or other. Oh wow, okay. So using wire with like medical bandage and PVA to basically build yourself into a tree. Oh gosh, this is amazing. Okay, jungle trees made by Nick Davis. Again, the sort of process of actually developing it. And then they give you here the illustration of the battlefield for a jungle battlefield. And just some of the depth here. Okay, you know, an assault team lies in wait. If the enemy attempts to cross the clearing, they can blow them apart with their demolition charges. The mortar squad is deployed far back because it needs no line of sight to fire on the enemy. The sniper using the trail to make the most of the long range of his sniper rifle, like just the depth they're going into is sort of talking about all of it. You know, settlement. A clearing has been added to the settlement to create a 6-inch ring of open ground around the buildings. I mean, this is, but yeah, I think once we get into the actual rules of playing, and it does become, there's quite a lot. Now, okay, showcase. Here are some great examples of modelling and painting Death Ward veterans. So some bloke has put a Dark Elf Cold One. Dark Elf Cold One, what the hell is that? Making himself a Catachan Rough Rider. Some bloke has done a lot of kit bashing. That's amazing. Some bloke has done a lot of different painting. Okay, and this is really interesting because this looks very familiar. So Michael Perry's large-scale Catachan jungle fighter. He sculpted the model for the open category of Golden Demon 1996. Now that looks a lot like Sergeant Ripper Jackson, the limited edition miniature, which I'm very lucky to own. So, wow, absolutely, that's amazing. Look at this. It's just amazing, isn't it? Wow. Okay. Now this is almost like the summary page, and I understand the most of the books had like a summary page. We could just quickly flick to it. But what's cool here is the explanation of the Catachan Fang, the Night Reaper, and the Devil's Claw. Now, what's cool here is the Catachan Fang is 20 inches long. Now, do I have? I'll just get my my tape measure. Yeah, so 20 inches long is 20 inches long is that big. That's not a knife. That's a sword. That's crazy. Like imagine that's a blade. It's a sword. So a 20-inch Catachan Fang of gleaming steel, and it talks about here how your weapon basically it's really linked to like the Pride. It's like a really sort of treasured item. Night Reaper, which is basically a matte version, and then the Devil's Claw, I think is between 3 and 4 feet long. Oh man. Imagine one of those things flapping that around, like ridiculous, ridiculous. But it does talk about it's used metal from Catachan, and it's highly, a very strong metal, which doesn't damage very easily and always maintains its bladed edge. So really cool to see that detail, and just how ridiculously big a Catachan Fang is and the Devil's Claw. Okay, there's a sort of summary of everything. And now we get into the glory of jungle warfare. So jungle terrain and fighting details. And I'm going to do this massive injustice because I've tried to read through it, but there's a lot going on. So, okay, so roll once for the terrain generated for each 12 inch along the table's longest edge. 2d6. You then basically have to deploy one of these. So dangerous terrain. Then you've got marshes, thermotropic vines, Venus mantrap, spitting cactus, carnivore lair, and boiling muddle tar pits. Settlement streams, clearings, hill, clearing, barren hill, clearing, road, ravine, overgrown ruins. Okay, so you can roll out and deploy your pieces. But I mean, if you had every single sort of piece of that terrain, you're really, really dedicated to the game. Okay, so jungle fighting. So, you know, I think I read in here that you need to explain to your opponent how this all works, because I imagine if you're playing Catachan versus an army which isn't good at fighting in the jungle, it'd be quite a one-sided game. But I think, as we read in a sec, it does give a bit of indication that other armies compete. But, you know, you've got getting spooked. Units moving through difficult terrain usually roll 2d6 and pick one, the highest is CR4, they can move through difficult terrain. But if you roll a double one, the unit is spooked as described below. Blah, 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 blah. A unit spooked either surprise some sort, immediately blaze away in panic. Okay. I'm not going to make sense of that, but something happens. Okay, this talks about seeing through the jungle. As per this rule we saw before, you can see up to 6 inches through woods or jungle terrain. Okay, that's you can only see 6 inches. And it did say for one of the units in the previous data sheet that they could see within 12 inches if they stayed still. So you basically got these, you know, this game where you're moving your models around, and you can imagine units getting really close, but as long as they're not within 6, they can't see each other. So really representing Bring to Life jungle warfare, which, having trained the jungle in the army, is a very close country environment where contacts happen within like 15 meters. Okay, it talks about vehicles, difficult terrain tests, skimmers, they hover above the jungle. Okay, grots, it gives a nod to grots. You know, they can actually help. It talks about, I think, if orcs are nearby Gretchen within 6 grots, they can basically use the benefit of the grots, which can move through difficult terrain tests, I guess, because they're so short. Hills and jungle terrain. Okay, something about like how you see stuff. And then ambushes. Now, I tried to read this, but didn't make sense of it. But I think, okay, so you basically set up a grid, and then you get to lay you actually get to put the model in the grid. And then if the opponent's unit moves through that area, you can spring the ambush, as per the name. Now, scanning devices. Races that don't have scanners or auspexes include the following models which have the ability to detect ambushes and booby traps. So, okay, you could bring to the tabletop, if you're the opponent to the Catachan force, some scanners and auspex, which does something. Don't know. But then it says lictors and hive tyrants, farseers and rangers, mech boys, orcs or skig hounds or attack squigs, etc., etc. They can basically detect this stuff. So I'm not going to read all this here, but this is fantastic. I mean, to think that you can only see your opponent if they're within 6 inches within the jungle, and then you can set up ambushes for your opponent, but they've also got ways of detecting you. This would have made for some very immersive games. I'm sure hyper complex, but really cool. Right, booby traps. Okay, as we saw before, there's 4 types, I think there was. So booby traps are bought as heavy weapons support options from your army list. Their location is recorded in the same way as an ambush. Okay, divide the table into 1-inch squares and record the squares where they're trapped. Each booby trap allows you to trap 1 square inch. Whoa. Wow, 1-inch square. That's. I mean, I don't know how big the board was, and imagine trying to keep track of that. Like, you need like little grid references to mark where everything was. Okay, but either way, that's amazing. That's so cool. Setting off booby traps. We saw the results, the reasons before, but then, you know, okay, but this is really immersive. Like, that is a lot. There's a lot going on here. You can imagine playing this game like in a tabletop like this. You know, and I imagine there would have been a lot of debate about, you know, the model's only halfway on this piece of terrain. What's the impact on something? You know, when does the ambush go off? A lot of line of sight challenges. I mean, And that's where obviously the new edition of 40k and to a degree 9th is a lot more clear cut with terrain. And again, if you're around in this time, tell me what it was like. But I get the sense it would have been a lot of questions and debate asked about sort of navigating terrain benefits or negatives depending on what side. But yeah, here you can see some fantastic lore about sort of the booby traps themselves. And again, having served in the army, this obviously has been researched obviously from the Vietnam War, which was horribly common as far as the Viet Cong in the north, the NVA using this type of tactics to defeat the Americans, Australians, and other contributing forces to that war. Okay, so yeah, you got Colonel Ironhand Strachan, year 2000, and to think he's still being used today is fantastic to see. Our favourite bloke, Sly Marbo, again, still around today. And you can see, okay, so 130 points, feels like a lot. I don't know if that's good or bad back in these days, but unique bionics. So this gave him basically a power fist, I think. And now, bionics was a universal rule. Well, after the model was killed, if you rolled a d6, on a 6 they stood back up again on 1 wound. And it does actually say here that if he does that, he can't use his bionic arm anymore because it's been disabled. But yeah, super cool to see that. And I think, okay, strength is only 2. I would have assumed it's a bit high. But then, okay, the Catachan Devil Force is unique in having very high proportion to Strachan may count Catachan Devils as troop choices rather than elite choices. Okay, so that's a bit, okay, he allowed you to take more of the Devils, which are the, let's have a go back, the Devils are the elite. Okay, they're the guys who can, they're hardened and they can do ambush and they count as troops. And I think I flicked over it, but the army structure here, unsurprisingly, the compulsory unit is headquarters and infantry squads under platoon commander and platoon structure, and everything else is optional. So again, it's, I mean, not much change to the way sort of 9th edition worked in the early stages, with troops being compulsory. Right, Sly Marbo. Now, I think the only real thing that makes him really unique, again, you can see it's really cool to see his Ripper Pistol, still around today. Basically, it's poison and lightweight. His Venom Blade lets him reroll failed wound rolls in close combat. But what he can do is, unlike other snipers, after he's moved and he's revealed, you can remove him in your movement phase as if it was a normal sniper. Write down the coordinates of the square Jacob to that if he's disappeared. He may reappear there using the ambush rules from the start of the next turn. Oh, okay. So he can, like the snipers, he disappears and come back. Essentially, I don't know how this all works, but again, it's super cool to see that in the year 2000, these two miniatures or models were in existence, and 23 years later, they still exist. And their rules, largely, even today, give a nod to these ancient rules. Yeah. Okay. I think as we go through the rest of the book, I think we're at basically the end of it. But again, lots of stories. I'm not massive into lore. I enjoy it, but I'm not going to read all this text here. But it looks like there's a good old story about some battle somewhere. And then, yeah, talking about the exotic Catachan flora and fauna. And if you've read any of the books, these will all sort of make sense to you. But yeah, I mean, obviously the Catachan Devil is some sort of like creepy crawly scorpion. I don't know what the rest of these are, but again, if you've read the books, Man Trap, okay, Flying Swamp Mamba, and the Coiling Death Cobra. Oh boy, no wonder why you got to carry a 2-inch blade around. But yeah, okay, Screaming Devils. You know, again, I'm very confident most of these are metal. Maybe they're plastic at this point, but obviously these old school Ogrims, old school heroes, they're definitely metal, aren't they? Yes, they're definitely with the old school heavy weapon teams with the bloke sat behind them with the look how puny they are. Old school. But yeah, everything's old school. Year 2000, long time ago, 23 years ago. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. I certainly did. I'm definitely going to be buying the 3rd edition first Codex to review as well, because I've done quite a few as per the playlist I've shared. But yeah, hopefully enjoyable over the last, how long has it been? Oh wow, 34 minutes of me mumbling away, but yeah, hopefully you found it interesting, and if any questions or comments, and again, if you're a war dog from the year 2000 who played, please leave in the comments. But yeah, but if you enjoy this, want to support me, you can do so with a like, comment, or by subscribing, joining my Patreon platoon, or simply watching any other of my YouTube videos. A massive thanks to my current supporters. Get your bayonet sharp, last gun oiled. Faith in the Emperor strong. Patreon platoon, sound off. Tank Commander Glenn. Tank Commander Watchdog Van Etten. Tank Commander Mitchell. Colour Sergeant DuPont. Sergeants Adal, the Colonel Merrill. Veteran Gibson, Hall, Lundeen. Guardsman Beard, Coquelin, Flint, Hills, Malik, Nitton, Nguyen, Smith, Tom, Tompkin. Conscript England, Gilliam, Goodwin.